Hello, welcome everyone to Spark Disruption, the Easy Way podcast. Today we are with us Lai Chen Wee. He's the former training manager of Accenture, and he's been able to convert his training face-to-face to virtual. Over 90% of the training face-to-face is converted in virtual since last year, and he has trained over 2,000 people in Accenture in the last 12 months. So today we are going to talk with him about what companies today should consider if they want to move from face-to-face to remote training, essentially. So without further ado, I will pass the word to Lai, and perhaps he can tell us more about his experience. Welcome today, Lai. Good morning.
Yeah, morning. Thank you, Francesco, for the introduction. And welcome everyone for these recordings. So I'm Lai. Normally, people just call me Lai. No need the full name. For the past 20 years, I have the privilege to work with a lot of multinational companies like Accenture, like Genting, Toyota, Honda, and also with government sectors, Malaysia Productivity Corporation. So 20 years in L&D industry, and we do aware that since last year, March, a lot of training need to be converted into virtual session due to the pandemic. And even with this kind of situation due to pandemic, there are several factors that we need to consider. Whether are we ready or not to take up this virtual training or e-learnings. So today I want to take these opportunities to share my experience, what have I done, what have the company considered before we run a full-scale virtual training.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I think it's going to be very useful also for our listeners today, because I feel that since last year, obviously with the pandemic, there's been an explosion of Zoom call and a lot of webinars, right? But from that to integrate completely into a company, and switch from the old style of face-to-face to remote training, I guess it's not that immediate and simple. So perhaps today would be interesting to know, what did you do, to transform 90% of the face-to-face training, and what they should consider essentially? What's the first few factors that company nowadays and like L&D managers or training managers should consider before moving into remote training, which has become anyway a necessity for most of us?
The biggest issue that we need to consider before we convert any face-to-face to virtual session is what we call the doability, is whether the session, whether the training objective able to be scalable to a virtual session. So example, a training objective talking about customer service. After this training, the participant able to demonstrate customer service behavior. So when we use the word demonstrate, how do we do it face-to-face? We do a demo and we're able to see the participant. We return the demo during the session. But in virtual session, how do you do that? You only have a camera in front of you. Everyone is looking at a small camera, looking at the 40-inch to 70-inch screen. So how do you know that the person able to return the demo? Okay. And when I talk about scalability, in a classroom session, a trainer standing in front, you can see a person doing the customer service behavior 20% or 30% in a group, and they can do it in a group. In a virtual session, maybe everyone is receiving the training from home, and do you have the time or the capability to view everyone in the screen to do the customer service behavior or not? And worst case scenario is, how do you able to make sure that people are able to do group activities? Example, the customer service just now. You want a customer, you want a person providing service? How do you make sure everyone in the session are able to do that? So when we do this virtual training, you must be flexible enough to evaluate what is the thing that you may sacrifice when you're using the virtual session. Yeah. My biggest takeaway from last year is we noticed that just now the customer service training, the coaching session become more difficult to conduct and more difficult to evaluate whether the person really learn or not from the virtual session.
So
And
are you saying that? Are you saying that some of the training are easily convertible in remote, and some instead has some difficulties essentially,
yeah,
or some of them cannot be converted in remote? What do you think? I
yeah,
mean, about this?
I would not say cannot. It's
Mm.
just become more difficult, and you need to challenge the trainer or the training coordinators to have multiple ways to make sure the delivery is provided to the learner. Yeah. And
Okay.
when you talk about easy or not, I do believe if the training objective is talking about awareness, okay, after attended this training, the participant able to recall the 5 principles of customer service. If the objective is to recall, it's very easy. Okay, you just do the virtual session, whether it's a instructor-led training, a trainer in front of a screen, whether you give them e-learning courses to attend, then at the end, they're able to recall whether during the session, whether during the assessment, that is very easy. But if
Mm.
you're talking about behaviors, you want people to demonstrate, that will be a bit of challenge. And I faced the biggest challenge is on coaching session when people need to evaluate body language. So in a classroom session, it's so easy to look at the person's whole body, the physical body. You look at how they react during the coaching session. But in this virtual session, if you look at right now, we are just like in a passport photo scale. Yeah, you only can see my face.
Yes.
The most is my hand gesture.
Yes.
So how do we evaluate the learner interaction? So that will be a challenge as well. Yeah.
Understood. Actually, to be frank, also we have a similar case, for example, with one of our clients right now that are interested to run a remote training, and for a specific training, they are looking at the simulation, right? But the simulation that has been done before was in a physical environment, so definitely, you know, the type of, let's say, physical interaction that was in the simulation was easy to reproduce. But now, because it's virtual, then has to be retaught completely to make sure, you know, that the people, if there are 15 people or 10 people in the room, they have to be able to do it, first of all. Second, you know, the trainer has to be able to follow what's going on, you know. So definitely the use of technology is important. The use of perhaps different type of apps to create that interaction. But before using the apps, you also have to think about, okay, the game, for example, if it's a game, if it's a scenario, it's a simulation, you have to think, I guess, about, okay, how it's going to happen now virtually, where everybody's behind the screen and they're not together, you know?
Correct.
So I agree with you. I think before going to that, you have to think about, especially from the trainer perspective, but also from the organizer, how this is going to play a role, you know, for the people, for the learning key objective of the people, essentially, right?
Yeah. So we back to the one of the factor that I mentioned about the what we call the scalability, whether the program can be scaled in terms of training objective. Another thing that we consider about scalability is about the time. Example, we talk about face-to-face. You are doing a 7 hours training in a day. So you can have a seminar rooms, you go to a hotel, 7 hours a day, you just completely doing your training. People are face-to-face, they are provided with lunch and tea break. People willing to spend 7 hours to learn. But in front of a camera, you want people just look at laptop for 7 hours, and it's a bit challenging. Yeah. So if you look at your ability to watch a movies,
Yeah.
2 hours movies, 3 hours, I think 4 hours, I think already too long already. Okay.
That's
And
already considered a marathon, I think.
yes, and then when you're watching a movie, you have the ability to pause. Okay, you can pause, you can go to washroom, you can go to refill your popcorn. But in virtual training, if you're doing instructor-led training, a trainer keep lecturing for 7 hours. I don't think the instructor or trainer are able to do that. And you also need to consider the learner, the participant. So in terms of objective, in terms of time, you really need to have some studies and whether the company culture is accept that kind of approach or not. I also have some managers, okay, during working hours, 9 to 5, they are working. So I expect the virtual session to do it 8 p.m. until 10 p.m.
Oh.
So it's something new for people, you know. So
Yes.
they're already busy with work. Suddenly, just because I'm working from home, just because I access from computer, now you expect me to sit another 2 hours in front of this laptop. So psychologically, mindsetly, it's also a challenge.
Yes.
So we need to consider all this, even how long the duration, when we want to conduct the training, is something that need to be determined before you want to go for a virtual training. Yeah.
True. Yeah, I agree with you. I think 7 hours training on virtual is crazy. It's not possible.
Yeah.
I mean, you can do it, but it's not effective. People will lose their train of thoughts and they will be distracted after like 1 hour or two, essentially. So I guess you need more breaks and you need to reduce that number of hours to, I would suggest like maximum 4 hours in a day. And then, so if your session is longer, then you can split it in session in several days. And you give a space for people. So, and during the 4 hours also, there should be a couple of breaks for people to, you know, have, like, how do they say, going off, I mean, off screen, because it's tiring, it's tiring. For a person like me also, that I'm very like easily distracted, I would say, and it would be very hard for me to be like in front of, you know, a screen for 4 hours. So unless, I mean, the training, of course, it could be engaging, you know, and the session could be interactive, but still 4 hours above that is going to be hard. So I agree with you. So the timing is important. When the session, how the session is also, how do you say, delivered is also important.
Yeah.
Unless it's like an awareness session where I talk and then you just guys listen, then it's like a movie. But most of the time it has to be like, you know, two ways kind of conversation where also other people stay engaged. Otherwise, they fall asleep most probably.
Correct. So what we discussed just now is more of the thing that we need to consider before we running the virtual session. And you touch a
3 points,
bit,
right? Like
yeah.
3 points, right? Do you say doability, scalability, right?
Yeah.
And the third one is what, the timing or
yeah, scalability also regarding the timing, the training objective, and you touch a bit about the approach during the virtual session. How do you make it more engaging and interactive? Okay, we call it the interactivities, or we call it the activation session. Okay. In classroom session, we always use multiple approach during training delivery. We use lecture, we use video, we use music, we use game. Okay. The reason behind why we have so many approach, because every participant learning style is different.
Yes.
Generally in the market, people are talking about whether this person is audio, is this person visual, or this person is kinesthetic, means like to do something, movement activities. So in a face-to-face session, it's very easy to have this multiple approach to make sure the learning style is catered to, because everyone learn differently.
Yes.
In virtual session, the person that like to learn visually and audioly, they can get the most from the
Yes.
virtual session. But if a person that don't like seminar, don't like lecture, they like to do group activities, they like to be hands-on, and you force them to sit in a virtual session, for them it's a very torturing session.
Yeah, they would shut down.
They will learn, but they will learn less compared to the audio and visual style people.
True.
So how do we make sure we have this kind of fairness to cater to all these learning style? So even in your classroom session, how to convert the games into a virtual session with the current technologies, and also depending on your trainer's capability. So
Yeah.
this is something that you also need to consider. Yeah.
Okay.
I can see some trainers, they are very confident with lectures, but suddenly we want them to use Kahoot, Mentimeters, even we want them to show video or share screen during Zoom call. They even don't know how to use the features. This is all the thing that you need to consider before you just, okay, due to pandemic, we just start a virtual session. If you don't do all this kind of thinking or planning tactically, you will jeopardize your virtual session. And the worst case is people fed up with the virtual session. Okay. And when you want to call people to join virtual session again, in their head, they have such a bad experience,
Right.
and it will defeat the learning purpose. Yeah.
Okay. So you're saying like the approach is very important, especially because now we're going to remote, and then remotely is a bit difficult to gather those three type of how do you say way
Learning
people
style.
learn, learning
Yeah,
style.
correct.
So either audio, visual,
Visual,
or they like to
kinesthetic,
do
yeah.
something like kinesthetic. So that is something to really be considered when trainers are gonna set up the own sessions for that. But it's also based on the participant, I would say. So because they are, like you say, some of the participants, especially depending on the function, are very practical people, right? So if they are very practical people, they won't like you say, they wouldn't like to sit down and listen. They would like to do something. So I guess once they consider remote training session, it also has to really look at the audience, right?
Yes.
What type of audience is that? Of course, if it's a mixed audience, then it's a little bit more difficult, right? But
Correct.
if you know that the audience is a very practical audience, that they like to do things, that they like to try things, then has to be really on simulation, on cases, on practical exercise, right? Which has its own set of challenges when you go remote, but it's possible. Nowadays, there are a lot of tools out there.
Yeah. So there are also ways to handle that. Not everything you have to do during the virtual session. Example, before you start a virtual session, we know they are very kinesthetic. They like to do works. They like to do study. Sometimes we do send assignment, or we call pre-work, before the virtual session.
Yes.
Okay. And since we cutting down the time from 7 hours to 2 hour session or 4 hour session, you cannot jam everything in a session. Due to the scalability, we scale it to a shorter time. So we sometimes need to use the time before the virtual session to engage the learner, okay? So that they can do some study, they can do a case studies, they need to look for information, even they need to form a group to have a discussion and bring it in during the virtual session. This is some of the tips that I use to maximize the virtual session.
Yeah, that's a fantastic way, because sometimes you want to do actually less is more, right? So especially if you have now 4 hours or 2 hours, you can, like you say, you can do everything. So yeah, having a pre-work is a fantastic idea. Of course, then you need the buy-in of the participant, and then you need also that the manager or the leader, they are running this, they are leading that specific team, also engage and how do you say, make sure that the participants are doing it, right? They are,
Yes.
otherwise, the pre-work, it will be no work, right? So it has to be done. And so that will be prior to the experience. Then I guess you have the workshop itself. So like what we discussed in terms of the different type of engagement or activities that you can do. And then you have an after, right? I guess, do you guys used to do an after work?
Definitely there will be some afters. So like I say, since the session becomes shorter, normally after the session, we will give them some reference, support documents, summaries, even some internet links where they can get further support. And we also get the learner superior to get involved. Okay. So after the session, example, the customer service training or coaching training, as a trainer, you have difficulty to engage with multiple people at one time. So we make use of the superior to observe the learning effectiveness, the behavioral changes, whether they are meeting the training objective or not. So what I want to say here, when we do a virtual training, don't just depend on the virtual session to ensure the learning. To ensure the learning, you may need to do something outside of the virtual session. Like before, whether assignments, set the expectation, communication, after, like you say just now, reference, support, summaries. So it's a total package. Don't trap yourself with just a virtual session and expect people can learn from it. Yeah.
Especially if you're looking for a change. I agree with you. Maybe this would be one interesting topic to discuss in the future about, which is linked to the ROI on learning, essentially, right?
Correct.
Linked to the fact that people are learning, but if you expect a behavioral change that can happen overnight, but you also have to have an environment, which is your company culture, that has to allow that to happen, right? So
Correct.
I think this could be a really long discussion, or maybe another podcast that we can do on that.
Correct.
So if you want to close this up, do you have any specific other, like if you want to summarize, what would be the three key, insights or tips that you would give to someone that wants to go from face-to-face to
like I said just now, you need to scalable training objective. Make sure you know how to make it into small pieces that your participant able to digest. Just like you want to eat a chicken, so you need to cut into small pieces, drumstick, chicken wing, chicken breast, so that people at the end can finish a chicken.
Yes,
okay,
and you need to digest it also.
yeah, you need to make it scalable. Number two, you need to make sure your learner readiness. Just now we talked about the time, the duration, the activities, the learning style. So you need to really make sure your learner is ready for all this. And as a trainer, as a training coordinator, you need to put more effort to ensure all this can happen. Yeah.
Okay, fantastic. Yeah. I think it was a very interesting session, and I hope our listener have got some good insight. By the way, Lai today is our also Chief Learning Officer for Ezyspark. So if anyone out there would like to know more about, how do I go about it from transforming my face-to-face training into remote training, or would like just to have a discussion, please feel free to reach us either in Ezyspark or Lai directly on LinkedIn or wherever you want. His email is lai@ezyspark.com. So feel free to send him an email, and he would be very happy, I guess, to,
yes.
to answer to any of your questions.
Yeah.
So thank you so much, Lai, for being here.
Thank you, Francesco.
And, we'll catch up soon for our next topic.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, and talk soon. Then again from Ezyspark here today, and thank you. Talk soon. Bye.